Welcome to the Crypto Morning News Report. I am your host, Taylor Schrum, and I'm so glad that you're taking your morning to jump in with me and analyze this morning's news. Now, crypto is making a bit of a move higher this morning. That is nice to see, considering that we have seen a lot of downside for crypto. That downside may not be over, but today we're getting a bit of a test back to the upside. Let's take a little bit of a look here at the 4-hour chart for Total 3. So Total 3 is all of the crypto except for Bitcoin and Ethereum. And as you can see here on my screen, Total 3 is currently rocking out at 958. That's $958 billion per unit, or that's 958 billion total market cap for crypto Total 3. So that right now is actually pulling back to live price here on the 4-hour, but we are up about, let's go to the daily candle so I get the correct quote here. We are seeing a little bit of green today on the screen for crypto, up 1% there on today's daily candle for Total 3. And if we go zoom out to the weekly, you'll see that we are keeping some success here. Similar to Bitcoin, we're staying above an important moving average level. On the weekly, we are continuing to print above this 939 level, which is the 50 weekly moving average, simple moving average. So let's jump around and look at a couple of names here from crypto. We'll go down to the daily chart for this, not the weekly. As you can see here, Solana is actually up a little bit today, fighting to preserve this line and not close a daily candlestick below 154. Hasn't done that. It's wicked 4 times below and 5 times now. So we'll see. Can we close this candle yet again above 154 for Solana? That would definitely be bullish. Chainlink in a similar position. Got a whole cluster of wicks down here. And actually, these two candles here actually are a bit higher than these previous closes back here. Take a look here at Aerodrome. A lot of folks' favorite because unlike Solana, which its equivalent is printing candlesticks right around here, right on the line with these November 5th and November 4th candlesticks, Aerodrome has just had a nice bit of upside movement for the holders there of Aerodrome. Let's see if we have any other remarkable movements here. Compound up 8%, doing pretty well this morning. Toncoin up 2.7%. You're starting to see kind of the trend. What the shape of the price action is very similar and somewhat easy to track for all of these. ENA just really hugging into this very tight range here on the daily candlesticks. Very interesting there for ENA. All right, Bitcoin, and then we will move on. Bitcoin in a little bit of a similar spot here to Chainlink, in that it has had these wicks down and now has been able to close candles above that exact zone where those candles were closing. So that's good to see there on the daily chart for Bitcoin. Not to say that Bitcoin can't push lower, because it could, but right now on the weekly chart, as I said before, Bitcoin is printing a weekly candle above this 50-day 50-week moving average, I should say. So that is quite, that's quite good that it's keeping intact the characteristics of this major bull run that have been in set so far. All right, let's jump on over to the news. After all, this is the Crypto Morning Report. Let's get into the sentiment outlook. I've characterized today as market waits for vote outcome at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What vote outcome? This is the vote outcome of the House of Representatives in the United States voting on whether or not they're going to approve the bill that came down from the Senate to reopen the government. We should see. We should see that today at 4 p.m. Now, things that start to come up in my mind when we talk about a vote at 4 p.m. is, could this be a potential buy the rumor, sell the news? Could we be seeing a pretty decent run up in stocks? In crypto. The stock side is actually not so bullish today. The S&P 500 is up 0.17 and the Qs are down 0.05. So they haven't really made up their mind. I'm on the weeklies here. They haven't really made up their mind on what direction the stock market wants to go this morning in terms of the indices. But crypto is markedly waking up and choosing pump, right? But is that potentially temporary? Is that going to be a buy the rumor, sell the news event that we've seen so many times? Seeing a lot of chat here, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Got some interesting headlines that folks are curious about. Let's keep going. We are now back into extreme fear. We've ticked back into 24. 24 is where fear and greed right now is at. 25 basis point cut in December is 71% likely, still very likely, but less likely than where the odds were this time last year, this time last month, predicting the September outcome. So I still think they're going to cut, but we'll see. Government open date, November 14th, 98% chance that is when the government is going to open. And look, we've been through a lot together here. Let me just say that is music to my ears, right? We're a couple of days into kind of taking for granted now that was even going to happen, that they're going to reopen the government. Let's not take it for granted. There's a lot of people out there who are in need, and the government is going to step in, because that's the government's role, right? Is to help people in need. Maybe there's some disagreement to be had there, but we'll continue here. Major focus. The House is scheduled to begin voting to reopen the government at 4 p.m. on Wednesday. All right, we've talked about that. I've got the gold star next to that story because that is the main focus. That is the main driver of today's price action and sentiment. You got to open the world's largest government, right? That's the main takeaway. JP Morgan launches deposit token JPM coin for institutional clients on Base, enabling instant 24/7 settlement, according to Bloomberg. Now, this is a pretty big deal because JPM until now has been on JP Morgan's internal blockchain rails, right? And they use it for different internal money movements and different things like that. That's interesting that now they have chosen an Ethereum layer 2 to go ahead and bring JPM coin to you and me and to the institutional clients as well. So that is a good sign, I would say, because there are other movements similar to this that are essentially like Canton coin, right? And then you also have other institutions. The ticker for Canton coin is just CC, Charlie. But then you have other institutions that have released blockchains or are working on blockchains that do not incorporate Ethereum or are just EVM compatible, right? And so that does pose some questions. Is there potentially some competition risk for what the private sector, what the non-banking sector has produced in terms of blockchain technology? Could that potentially be a growing narrative? These institution coins that have been birthed inside of Wall Street, inside of all that. So continuing here, Treasury Secretary Bessent says substantial tariff news is coming in the next few days. Could go either way. Okay, I'm saying it could go either way because that tariff news could be that they have a conclusion from the Supreme Court. I feel that it's a little bit too early to have that conclusion from the Supreme Court, that it would need more time, but they did request a expedited resolution from the Supreme Court on whether or not these tariffs that the Trump administration has levied against hundreds of countries and China and Canada and Mexico, are they going to stick around? That is a question that a lot of market participants want to know about. Is that potentially what is going to come in the next few days? We can only speculate. The other possibility is that it's going to just be completely unrelated to the Supreme Court, and the Trump administration is going to say, hey, we've made a bunch of new deals, right, with India, perhaps, or with Brazil or China or something like this. Maybe there's some big development there. The market's only left to speculate. There's not a lot of information on that. Knowing the Trump administration and the way that they interact with the media, though, maybe we get more information today on that. Bullish vibes. Treasury Secretary Bessent says substantial tax refunds coming in early 2026. So when this can be read a couple of different ways, what you need to know is that this is potentially going to be a big rotation of liquidity to retail. So retail getting their hands on a decent amount of cash, very similar to the pandemic cycle where the same thing happened for a different reason. Stimmy checks went out here in the United States for a different reason. I believe the substantial tax refunds that Treasury Secretary Bessent is referring to is going to be a result of the big, beautiful bill being enacted January 1st, and that having a different outcome, different tax treatment for a lot of folks on the ground. Now, that is a bit of a contradiction. So let me just say it clearly here. You have Treasury Secretary Bessent, who's coming out and saying that there'll be a substantial tax refunds coming out early 2026, right? And when asked about the $2,000 stimmy checks that Donald Trump has been touting, Bessent's response was, I haven't talked to him about that, right? Maybe he's referring to the tax refunds. So the fact that we're getting a quotation days later where Bessent is reiterating substantial tax refunds will be coming out, to me, further contradicts what we're hearing from the president, which is that these $2,000 are going to be stimulus checks from the tariff revenue. Okay. Do you need to understand all this to be able to effectively trade and invest in crypto? I don't think so. And I can tell you why later in this episode of the morning news. But this is just something to know that the Treasury Secretary and Donald Trump are not seeing things, not having the exact same vision of how they're going to how they're going to enrich the lower class in the United States. Visa has launched a U.S. pilot allowing businesses to send stablecoin payouts directly from fiat-funded accounts. Very interesting. Okay, this is another development here from a kind of a legacy project that's moving there in the crypto space. Looking ahead, I have 2 new additions to the looking ahead section. We'll review the ones that have been here. December 1st, quantitative tightening ends officially. That's what Jerome Powell said in his last press briefing in September. December 10th, FOMC decision. Okay, so that's an important one. That one, again, as I mentioned before, 71% likely to be bullish, to be the cut as of today's betting odds. And this is the new one that I've added here to the looking ahead. Supreme Court ruling on tariffs, right? That's going to be an important ruling. The other addition here is economic data published. Lots to unpack. Asia markets were mixed. Let's camp there for a second though. Econ data published. What does that mean? This is a little bit of a complicated one, right? Because I think that if you boil it all down, it could potentially go either way. There's a chance that if they were to release all of the data, the Bureau of Labor Statistics that has not released this data because the government has been shut down, and so the employees there are not getting paid, presumably, or it's complicated how they're getting paid later on. So they're not doing the job. They're not releasing the data. They made one exception. They did release, I believe it was a inflation data, the headline inflation. But other than that, we've gotten weeks and weeks of no data from the job side or the inflation side. And so there's been some other indicators from the private sector like ADP for jobs. But for the most part, the Fed can make the claim that they're flying blind, right? And so that may be an incentive for them to pause rates instead of cut rates in December. So that will be very interesting. However, when the Bureau of Labor Statistics does get refunded and the government opens back up, are we going to get several weeks worth of data and the market's going to have to unpack all of that at once? That could potentially be a market tipping event. That could be a little bit of a volatile period if the market that has had a drought of data to trade on all of a sudden gets a bunch of data. And I'm talking about stocks and crypto. All right. Folks, that is the majority of the news. I am not going to spend too much more time on the charts today. On Wednesdays, we usually do a shorter version of the morning news. That is a lot of what we're seeing in the news. I'm kind of scanning right now to see if there's anything breaking, any breaking news, that I should say. Atlanta Fed President Bostic says he'll leave position when his term expires in Friday in February. I don't know that he's a voting member currently, though. All right. Yeah. All right. So we had a little bit of chat here. Let's get through that, and then we will go ahead and call it for today. Good morning. Circle stock had a great earnings report, and it's on a dip. That's right. Yeah. That's how it works. Circle also came out and said that they're looking into launching their own coin, right? Very interesting. Very interesting. In addition to their stable coin, I might point out. Yeah. All right. Continuing on here. True 49er for life said, Shrum, I posted a comment in Two Trading group chat. If you get a chance, take a look at it. It's about trading indicator and understanding their charts. Okay. Yeah, I'll take a look at that. We're constantly giving responses there in Discord, trying to help you all figure out this crazy world of crypto investing and trading. So true 49er for life. I will get in there and help you out there. Redline said, T-Shroom, Nev's gonna be a daily thing. Would love to see that. Does a great job bringing the news. Thank you. Thank you so much. It looks like your W key doesn't work and you're using two V's to spell things out. Redline. Very, very interesting if that's the case. You need to get a new keyboard, perhaps. FKIK said, good morning. My morning news. Thanks, Rum. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm here to help you all kind of navigate the news. A little bit of a bonus round here will end, but Wall Street Journal's Nick Timiraos reported growing division within the Fed over a December rate cut. Some officials cite sticky inflation and tariff effects to argue for a pause, while doves point to weaker jobs and slowing demand. A government shutdown disrupting key data has widened the split. The rate remains 3.75 to 4%, with markets still favoring a cut amid a rare hawk-dove standoff, right? So the addition of Stephen Marin to the board of the FOMC has caused a stir because Stephen Marin is quite a radical dove, meaning he wants to cut and potentially go into quantitative easing ASAP, and maybe even announce a policy and an intention to bring the Fed funds rate down to zero or negative, right? That's dovish. That's very dovish. While the rest of the board, is kind of in keeping with the part, what Jerome Powell thinks, right? Which is, no, you want to keep a neutral rate here. So that's going to be continuing to be interesting. I think that it's hard to see them not cutting rates in December is my take on that. Let's see. A little bit more on the JPM token. The token represents US dollar deposits held at banks and enables 24-hour real-time transfers via Base. Coinbase's associated public blockchain participants in the pilot include MasterCard, Coinbase, B2C2, with Coinbase set to accept JPM coin as collateral. All right. I'll leave it there. Let me give you guys a little bit of insight that's kind of been rattling around in my mind. Our traders are potentially bracing for Bitcoin to get down much lower, right? Something like 90, maybe even south of 90K. Now, it's not necessarily the case that we have to get down to those levels, but one of our pro traders, Rufio, and his analysis is yielding that there's a potential for Bitcoin to have quite a significant correction here, according to something called Wyckoff theory, that we are actually producing a course on that you will be able to understand Wyckoff theory much more in depth, made by Rufio, which is really exciting. So brace for that, right? You should not be scared by that. You should just, react accordingly, right? This is a good time to remind folks, if you are invested with money that you cannot afford to lose, you are making a bad decision. Don't make a bad decision worse by not correcting that decision. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. Then the other thing that I'm continuing to think about is this dynamic between AI stocks and crypto. AI stocks have had lower risk for very high reward, which is more appealing than crypto, which is high risk, high reward, right? So they both have high reward, but one has perceived lower risk. Okay. So a lot of the new liquidity coming into the market has been going over to AI stocks rather than going over to crypto. Okay. We know this because the S&P and the QQQs have been putting in all-time highs, while Total 3 and Ethereum have not had liftoff, right? So what could come next that could change that? My thinking is that what we're likely to see from here is that NVIDIA specifically, and if you're not familiar with AI equities and things like that, I might lose you a little bit here. But just speaking to folks that are tracking the market as a whole and understanding liquidity rotations, NVIDIA from here is going to have earnings. I believe it's on the 19th of next week. But NVIDIA has not reported earnings yet. When those earnings come out, that could potentially be the tipping point of when we see money rotate out of NVIDIA and further down the risk curve in the AI stock space. So what does that mean? My light prediction, is that if NVIDIA's earnings disappoints, and it is coming out on the 19th, Wednesday 19th, if that's a disappointment, and there's a lot of packed into that word disappointment, because it's how the market interprets NVIDIA's earnings. But if it's a disappointment, that money is going to go into names like Qualcomm and Google, right? It's going to go down the risk curve to perceive competitors to what NVIDIA does. AMD as well, Intel as well. Any chip makers, semiconductor stocks are potentially going to absorb some of that runoff, some of that selling of NVIDIA, and it will go into the competitors to NVIDIA, right? There's a lot of reasons for that. There's also a lot of reasons why NVIDIA's earnings could not disappoint and this phenomenon does not take place. How does this relate to crypto? Because there is a risk that during this transition of money rotating out of NVIDIA and into the others, the competitors to NVIDIA, the other chip makers, that some of that rotation actually finds its way into other asset classes. Maybe it goes into biotech, maybe it goes into pharmaceutical stocks, maybe it goes into energy companies, right? But some of it is likely to go into crypto. And there's also a chance that if NVIDIA's earnings disappointing, may actually spin up a cascading effect for AI as a whole, AI stocks as a whole, to actually go ahead and reprice back to the downside. People have been talking about an AI bubble for a while. I don't think that there's an AI bubble, so to speak, but there is the chance that some of the AI stocks are just overvalued, right? There's over enthusiasm, maybe even a blow off top is something that we could potentially see, and then a movement, a correction. Well, all of that money that sells out of that is potentially going to rotate somewhere else. And I think crypto has a good as chance as other alternatives, like I said, pharmaceuticals, biotech, Tesla, like there's all kinds of different places that money could land. But I think crypto, meaning SUI, Solana, HBAR, Bitcoin, obviously, Ethereum, Uniswap, Aave, these are the types of names that could potentially be prepared to capture some of that liquidity as it flows out of NVIDIA, right? Now, I think that that's possible. I think that that's also probable. That's kind of my light prediction on how we could see liquidity rotate over the next 2 months as a result of NVIDIA's earnings disappointing. But if NVIDIA's earnings doesn't disappoint, then the sexy, shiny train of AI equities continues to just march on, okay? What we learned yesterday is that SoftBank sold its entire position of NVIDIA, okay? So a big buyer, a big holder of NVIDIA, and I'm talking about, I think it was like 6 billion. I don't remember how big their position was, but it was in the billions. That signals to the market that something, right? It signals something, and it ain't we're buying more. It's we're selling. Now, what they did with that money, what SoftBank did with that money was they rotated into OpenAI because they have access to the private equity markets, and they didn't just have to buy Microsoft to get OpenAI exposure. They went directly into OpenAI with that money. And so that's a strategic move because now they're going to be early on OpenAI. When OpenAI presumably IPOs, that's going to be very beneficial for them, meaning SoftBank, the Japanese investment giant. Okay, I've said a lot of things. Maybe some of this went over your head. I'm trying to paint a picture that in tandem with all the bullish catalysts that are coming up, and we put a list out on the Tim Warren X account here. I will bring it up for you all. In addition to all of these catalysts here, you have that potential catalyst. And that is technically kind of in section 6 here, catalyst 6, which is the AI stock cool off. right? And by the way, this is not all of the bullish catalysts, but I'll go ahead and read them off for you. Crypto catalysts the bears don't want you to know. Base token initial offering. That could stir up a bunch of frenzy, unlock a bunch of pent-up demand for this token that hasn't launched yet. Now, could that be potentially bearish for Aerodrome? You have to do your own math on that. There's a case for that. There's also a case that it's really bullish for Aerodrome. Number two, Polymarket token initial offering. Polymarket has talked about coming out with their own token, right? Again, this isn't necessarily something that is structurally bullish. What it is it could potentially boost sentiment as folks get into a coin that actually does go up, right, for a change in a bull market, right? 3, Uniswap fee switch proposal vote, right? Yesterday, I think it was Monday, actually, the current leader of Uniswap introduced a proposal for the fee switch for Uniswap. If you don't know what that means, watch yesterday's morning news where I talk about that a little bit more in depth. When that vote goes through, if it votes positive, that could be quite bullish for the Ethereum DeFi ecosystem, right? Because a lot of attention, a lot of energy could rush into that system to go buy Uniswap. And if you know what Uniswap is, that's going to further benefit it. Trump's SBR buying schedule published. This is something we haven't gotten, and this is something I've been saying since July. We are likely not going to be getting until the midterms, because the midterms is all about keeping your cards to your chest after the election and waiting to see what cards are going to be important to play to get voting blocks to come vote for you in your party. So I believe that Donald Trump and his administration has strategically kept the SBR buying schedule close to their chest, and that's likely a card that's going to be played at some point, right? They clearly have an appetite to grab more Bitcoin, to buy more Bitcoin, because they just confiscated a record amount of Bitcoin, and that's actually causing a stir. Apparently, the Chinese have launched an investigation into that. They're not too happy, surprisingly, about the United States confiscating a bunch of Bitcoin from their shores. Anyway, passage of the Clarity Act, that's a huge one. That's extremely bullish, and that's potentially going to happen very, very soon. And this one is the other one that I talked about, AI stock cool off. That's kind of what I'm parking my analysis at today. You also have the quantitative easing story, huge, and you also have Jerome Powell being replaced, huge. The big one that's not on this list, obviously, is the government opening back up and the TGA being opened back up and able to that money to be flow as well. The TGA being the Treasury General Account. That is under Bessent, Treasury Secretary Bessent. He cannot spend some of that money, and so it's just piling up. When the government opens back up, a lot of that liquidity will flow, and we will see just what happens then. Have a great rest of your day. I'm staying bullish, but I'm staying aware that we could potentially see Bitcoin down below 90. So keep it strapped in. We'll see what happens. I'm hodling on. Adios.